All right. I would like to remind everyone that we have closed captioning on. So if you go to the bottom bar of your Zoom, you can click the live transcript and view the closed captioning. For those of you who are speaking, please enunciate clearly into your microphone to make sure that that works well. We also have an ASL interpreter here. So if you need the ASL interpreter, please find their image in the screen and pin it by clicking the 3 dots in the upper right corner. If there's any other accommodations that you need, you can please let us know. My name is Liz Kramer, and I'm the chair of the Community Mobility Committee. You can always send me an email with comments and questions, and I'll put my email address in the chat. So welcome. We are glad to have you all here. As a reminder, the Community Mobility Committee is a place for residents and interested individuals to advocate for and learn about mobility and transportation in the city of St. Louis. We would like to remind everyone to please be respectful in your conversations and questions today. We're really grateful to have so many folks from the city and from associated agencies here to talk with us and to work together. And we want to make sure that we're respectful of their hard work and efforts and also all of the things that we're all working towards here in the city. My other reminder is to avoid jargon and acronyms. If you're using a technical transportation term or an acronym, please define it. And if possible, put a link into the chat so that we're all able to learn more about that. Not all of our members are transportation planners or professionals. And so this is an opportunity for us all to learn together. And then I'd also like to remind us all to be mindful of time throughout our session today. We're going to be encouraging follow-up to happen outside of our meetings so that we can be sure we hear everyone's voices in the space. We hope that this will help us with keeping our meetings really focused and respectful. And I want to really encourage you to use the chat. Dawn will be taking notes, and we do incorporate everything we hear into the chat into the official notes. So that's the place to find the comments, the questions, and the things you all share. Okay, so to get started, I would love to have members and folks who are visiting us, if you can put your name and if you're representing an organization into the chat, that would be great. And then I'd like to invite our city partners to introduce themselves quickly, just your name and who you are. Scott, you're first on my screen, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure, good afternoon. Scott Ogilvie, City of St. Louis Planning and Urban Design Agency, Program Manager for Complete Streets. I guess we can hop to John.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Kohler, City of St. Louis Board of Public Service. I'm the Planning and Programming Manager for BPS, and I'll pass it to Grace.
Hi, everyone. Grace Kim, City of St. Louis Mayor's Office. Andrew, I will pass it to you.
Hello. I'm Andrew Lackey, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Office on the Disabled for the City of St. Louis. And I will pass it on to anyone else from the city on here.
Unless we've got someone on the phone, that might be it. So I'm going to ask Taylor to introduce himself.
Hi, Taylor March. Vice Chair for the CMC and Carondelet resident, also the Policy Director at TrailNet. Great,
thanks Taylor. So I'm going to drop our agenda, which was shared via email, in the chat so you all can follow along as we go. The next thing I'm going to drop in the chat is our minutes from our April meeting. I want to open this up if there are any questions, concerns, or comments on those minutes before they go into the official record. And I do want to make a note, this is actually later in our agenda, but I'm just going to say it now because now seems like a great time. I want to make a note that the last 2 pages of our minutes include a letter from the voting members of the CMC regarding the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Based on our conversation last month, the voting members wrote a letter which they sent to Mayor Jones. So you can find the text of that letter in there, as well as some of the comments and questions that came up in our last session. The responses are in blue in the notes. So that's the place to check those out. Okay, seeing and hearing no questions and concerns about the notes, I want to turn us over to our public comment period. So in this is a situation in which we'd love to invite members of the public and members of the committee to share concerns, questions, things that they've seen. In this time, we ask for generally to not have much discussion and back and forth. There might be a few quick things that we want to have folks respond to, but we will do follow-up on everything that is raised in this conversation after the meeting, and we will make sure that gets back to the person who's raised it, as well as recorded in the notes and shared with any appropriate city agencies or partners. So I want to open up the floor to see if anyone has any comments or questions they want to make sure get out there. And I guess I should say, we'd love it if you can keep your comments to under 2 minutes.
I have something if no one else is ready. I'm Becca Gilbert. Hey, I work for WashU, and my goal is to support and encourage the use of sustainable transportation, and that includes biking. Something that I think we're lacking that would be really helpful is a interactive GIS map for safe bike routes. You know, we want people to bike, but then we need to give them a resource to where to find the safest routes. If you use Google Maps, you know, it doesn't recommend good routes. So I was hoping, you know, someone here could give feedback on if that's possible, what we could do to make that. I know that we have some bike maps, but they're not, you know, they're static and they're not actively maintained. And then in the future, you know, ideally it's just, you know, the bike map or with the types of paths, but in the future, it could be good to have, you know, construction updates or anything impacting the bike lane so people can plan ahead. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
So we do have an updated ArcGIS bike facility map on the city's website. Now, a bike facility map might not be identical to like a safe routes map because there's probably many safe routes that do not actually have bike facilities. And then there's probably some routes that have bike facilities that are not necessarily the safest. But that data is out there. I think compiling a map that is safe routes is a little bit subjective and might have to be something that like an advocacy agency might make some recommendations to. But we do have a current bike facility map that is regularly updated now.
Thank you. Does that, I was thinking maybe like protected bike lanes. Is there something with dedicated and protected bike lanes that we could share?
Yes, so the bike facility map, it does differentiate different types of infrastructure, greenways, different types of bike lanes, just shared route markings. So those categories are, you know, they're different categories on the map.
Okay,
so we'll get that from the link from that for Scott and share that with you, Becca, and also with the rest of the committee. So that, and I think we can continue some conversation if other folks have ideas. There, we've got the link in the chat already.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you for raising that. Are there other topics that folks want to raise? Renee.
Yeah, I think I have been really frustrated with the Service Bureau. Not that things are slow, but just that there's no seeming transparency in the process. I feel like I've filed so many complaints about this area of Vandeventer that's just completely unwalkable. The curbs are corroded, there's big bumps in the street, there's trash strewn everywhere, and they just get like sent in and then eventually like dismissed. And I don't know, I think I wish that it wasn't just such a blank wall on the website, that it was more of an active process with people communicating timelines for things getting fixed, or like the fact that it's been acknowledged and prioritized. I think the other thing that I wanted to ask about was that going forward with new bike infrastructure, is there any plan to make the bike infrastructure like use best practices? I.e. things like having the parking lane on the outside of the bikes, or having some sort of physical barrier between cars and bicycles. It's I think that's another thing that's very frustrating about being a cyclist in St. Louis is the areas where there is infrastructure, a lot of it is still very unsafe. And I feel very threatened by the motorists. So I would be curious about what new bike infrastructure moving forward would look like.
Scott, do you have a brief response you want to give?
Well, yeah, a big part of today's agenda is talking about funded projects, which there are many of. John and I are going to discuss those, and I think it'll cover some of that question, although if we want to have kind of a more detailed conversation about any of those projects, we could maybe do it offline.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I think, Renee, you picked a great meeting to attend to hear more about the upcoming projects. I think on your question about CSB, thank you for raising that. We've talked a lot about maintenance issues, and so that's something we can think about how we can learn a little bit more about how that works and bring that back to the committee. Any other public comments? Sam?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people saw the new restriction about scooters in downtown after some of the issues over the past weekend. I'm just wondering, I mean, personally, I think this is a pretty harsh decision to ban scooters past 7 p.m. I mean, if this is a city that we're trying to make more car free and less car, having scooters specifically at 7 p.m. where there's Cardinals games, there's a lot of activity downtown. I'm not sure what the length of that is. I'm just wondering what if there's more information. I know Dr. Isom, who made this decision, Heather Taylor, they were on the previous CMC call. We have relationships with scooter companies. Just firstly, can we get more information about how long that is happening? You know, what are the restrictions on that? There was some information in the article, but just wanting a little bit more. Again, personally, banning scooters downtown is personally not a great decision. So and I assume the CMC would take a similar stance on banning a form of non-motorized transportation like that. So just wanted to put that out there and see if anyone else has any comments.
Thanks, Sam, for raising that. I actually was not aware. I don't know if we have the right crew to respond to that in the room today, but we will definitely follow up and get some more information about what the scooter situation is downtown.
Hey, this is Jamie from the traffic division. Sorry, I came on a few minutes late to go to introductions. The scooters, there has been a curfew downtown for a year or two that started at 8 p.m. It was modified to 7 p.m. with input from the police who were dealing with some issues regarding public safety. So I don't have a timeline for when we're going to push that back to 8 p.m., but it was only a change of 1 hour for the scooters.
So to that note, I didn't even know it was 8 p.m. As someone who rides a bike, I rarely use scooters. But even the curfew of 8 p.m., I still feel like is very harsh. If you've ever been to a Cardinals game, those things don't get out till 10 p.m. mostly. I keep using Cardinals games because that's a high pedestrian generator, high usage. And so is that something that's pretty common across other cities? I just feel like restricting scooter usage, specifically in downtown, which I feel like is one of the higher areas of scooter usage, just again, perpetuates this idea that, oh, drive downtown, park downtown kind of thing. And it just perpetuates this usage of cars and cars and cars.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does seem pretty common. The companies that we're dealing with, the two, have had similar issues in other cities. It usually stems from the police and their comments regarding downtown activity, downtown when we have cruising season. They're dealing with a lot of issues there, and it seems to compound it with some of the use of the scooters, not your traditional users, but the folks that are using them for the unintended purposes. So yeah, the people that use them for the right reasons are being punished, I guess, directly with that, but we're also trying to curtail some of the people using it for the wrong reasons.
Thanks, Jamie. And I think this is probably also an opportunity for us to follow up with Dr. Isom about how the downtown safety efforts are going and how that relates to pedestrian and non-auto transportation. So we can do that as well. I have a last call for comments.
Hi, this is Bobby Brantley.
Hi, Bobby.
Yes, good afternoon. I just have some comments on I'm a caregiver for the disabled, and I've been trying to keep my clients engaged with the public, different activities, and just a comment what I encountered. One, it's very difficult to maneuver wheelchairs up the ramps. The grades are too steep. Once inside a facility, sometimes the carpet is too much. It's very hard to push through carpet. Sometimes in a hotel, the doorways are so small. And the other thing is, the beds are so high, my clients cannot get into the bed.
Thank you, Bobby. And I know you've brought up concerns in the past about access to bus stops and helping people access those too. So I think that sounds like it connects. Thank you for those. Okay, my final note, which I will also email to everyone, is that MoDOT is taking feedback still on the Highway 64 improvements. They have a virtual public meeting going on. I put the link in the chat, and I will also forward the email from Jen. So if you want to provide feedback on how 64 exists in the central corridor, how difficult or not difficult it is to get across it or around it on foot or on bike, on transit, now is a great time to do so. So I would like now to hand over the reins here to Scott Ogilvie and John Kohler, who introduced themselves at the beginning of the session. They are going to give us some updates on funded and ongoing projects in the city. So we're really glad to have you all here.
Great. Yeah, so I think John and I are both going to cover the many upcoming projects that might be of interest to the Community Mobility Committee. Let me quick. Starting share screen will stop other participants.
You should be good now, Scott.
There we go. Can people see this map or half of it? The top half?
Yes.
Okay. So we thought this month would be a good month to do a project update because we have a lot of projects that are entering construction this year, 2022, as well as many significant projects of interest to the CMC that are funded but are still a few years away from construction. And every year, East-West Gateway typically does funding recommendations in May. And so we have some new funding recommendations that are hot off the presses. Those projects are not finalized until later this year when the East-West Gateway Board approves them. But there's some significant new projects that have an initial funding recommendation. So May is a good month for an update because we've got the latest news. We have a couple maps to share. John's going to talk about this map. This map is it's the multimodal projects that are in East-West Gateway's TIP, which is their Transportation Improvement Program. So these tend to be more significant transportation projects that the City of St. Louis or a partner agency like Great Rivers Greenway or Bi-State has received federal grant funding for. So these are bigger projects. They tend to have a longer timeline to implement. But that also frequently means that they can be, much more substantial than projects we fund alone. So with that intro, I think I'll turn it over to John. And John, feel free to tell me where you want me to navigate the map to or zoom in.
Sure. Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. If you don't mind relinquishing the screen, and then I'll just control it from my end.
Sure.
Okay, can we all see this?
Yep.
All right. This is a very exciting time for the city of St. Louis because we have so many major multimodal projects in the works, and specifically a lot of separated cycle tracks and bicycle facilities, as Renee has alluded to. And my goal today is to give a very high level overview of each of the projects, maybe 10 minutes to quickly run through. And then Scott will present on the second plan showing our ARPA related projects. And multimodal on every one of these corridors will always incorporate pedestrian upgrades and transit upgrades. And some of them will talk about or will address the bike facility enhancements and new infrastructure. I'm going to start on South City and blow this up a little bit. So our further south project, we're just now starting design on the South Broadway from River City Casino Boulevard up to Dover. It's a two-way separated cycle track and lane modifications. We plan to start construction on that in 2023, probably toward the middle of that. It's $1.2 million congestion mitigation grant. Our next Louisiana Collins Streets pilot project is in construction. We just started a month ago. It's about $1.2 million, running from Merrimack to Gravois, various types of traffic calming measures, bike boulevard type project with rainscaping, green infrastructure, bump outs, and other features to slow or at least accommodate speeds for vehicles and bicycles at the same pace so they can run the roadway in unison rather than in conflict. Our next big project is the Tower Grove Connector. We're partnered with Greater St. Louis, Inc. Our first phase is probably about 3/4 of the way done with the design. They're in right-of-way, running from a two-way cycle track at Magnolia on Tower Grove Avenue to Vandeventer, and then going east on Vandeventer to Sarah and crossing Vandeventer, where we just applied in preliminary recommendation by East West Gateway to fund the second phase two-way cycle track called the Connector 2 that will run from along Sarah to the north all the way up to Forest Park Avenue. It will connect into the Brickline Greenway directly and provide a nice southerly interconnection of a high-end separated bicycle facility. Next is the Compton Bridge. That project should start construction in 2025. It's a big $20 million transportation project. We have incorporated separated bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities on the east side of the bridge, which will connect into the eventual Brickline Greenway, and then the bike lanes on Shoto on the south. This project tied to the Jefferson Interchange reconstruction, we'll call it the 20th bikeway from Shoto in Jefferson up to Scott, and then it connects into the new MLS site. That project just started construction, and it will be it'll be fully separated adjacent to the street on a good stretch, but then there's an isolated stretch that functions as a multi-use greenway that's separate on its own path up to Market near 21st. And then we're just starting design on the 20th Street cycle track, which will connect into near this east side of the stadium, run along 20th all the way up to St. Louis Avenue, and then has a stub out to connect into the new NGA site. We anticipate that will start in 2024, $11 million congestion mitigation project. Many of you have been waiting for this Tucker cycle track. We're just now kicking off design. That'll also be a two-way separated cycle track running on Tucker from Shoto, the bike lanes on Shoto, north up to Washington Avenue. It will also cross eventually the Brickline Greenway, probably in the neighborhood of Market. The project shown in red is the Jefferson Parnell. That's predominantly pedestrian and transit upgrades, and full street reconstruction, lane modifications. That's out for bid right now. We'll start construction this year. It's about $25 million to support access to the National Geospatial Agency site, which is this 100-acre site at Cass and Jefferson. So moving over, part of the Deer Creek Greenway is being planned with the city of Maplewood, and St. Louis is kicking in some ward capital to connect the Deer Creek that's already built in Maplewood and bring it in to tie into the River to Pear Greenway. It's a $6 million project that's anticipated to start in 2025. We showed some bi-state improvements at the DeBolivar Delmar Metrolink station, starting in 2024 by bi-state. And then lastly, we've been working closely with MoDOT in a partnership to incorporate various traffic calming measures along Riverview from Halls Ferry Circle down to I-70. We are providing about $300,000 in ward capital to build various bump outs, enhanced crosswalks, better transit stops, and other traffic calming measures as MoDOT does their standard mill and overlay project. And that should start next year. So that's a real high level overview. I think I've hit pretty much everything, but very exciting to see where we stand now with the only cycle track on Leonore K. Sullivan and then a little piece on Chestnut. So we're moving in the right direction.
John, you might have skipped over some of those Brickline segments. Like
oh yeah, that's
right. Spring and yeah.
Point. So in the central area of the city, GRG received a raise grant in yellow from Fairground Park going down to Cass. That's under design. I just got word that the Smith Group is designing that piece, just starting. And then under recommendation by East West Gateway is a phase 2 of that project of the northern section of the brick line to run from Cass down to Lindell, which I believe they'll amend that design and then incorporate that into this big segment of the Brickline Greenway. Anything else I missed, Scott?
The segment from Cortex Metrolink to Grand Metrolink.
Oh yeah. So this piece that will extend the existing brick line at Cortex Metrolink. There's a design that's, I believe that's commenced for 13 million GRG to bring that easterly connection from Sarah up to near Grand Metrolink station. And then there's also beginning soon the design to connect from that RAISE grant down to all the way to the Metrolink corridor. So that's a good connection. So brick lines moving along in various phases, and we have all these other interconnected, low stress, higher end bicycle facilities with the addition of ADA upgrades at intersections, and working very closely with Bi-State on optimization of transit stops and transit upgrades. That's it in a nutshell. Maybe, I don't know if we want to entertain questions now or have Scott go through his, probably might be a good idea, and then we can open it all up.
Any preference, Liz?
Let's have Scott share, and then we'll do some questions.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is projects that have recently been authorized through Board Bill 184, which was primarily allocating ARPA funding, American Recovery Plan Act funding, that the federal government gave to the city of St. Louis. So I'm going to highlight some transportation projects that are called out in Board Bill 184. These are, so the red lines are resurfacing projects. So there, in total, there's about $10.5 million in that board bill that is allocated towards resurfacing major corridors. It is frequently difficult for us to do these major corridor resurfacing projects because we fund a lot of resurfacing through the ward capital program, and all these corridors run through a lot of wards, and that can just make coordination kind of difficult among older people. So the corridors that are identified for resurfacing are Goodfellow from Delmar to Halls Ferry Circle, Union from Delmar to West Florissant, the full length of Kings Highway from Gravois at the southern end to West Florissant on the northern end, the full length of Grand from Crondelet Park up to where Grand ends at Hall Street. And you'll notice from the last map, there are a few segments here where there's other projects that overlap, but you know, obviously they'll either work in coordination or we'll leave the major project to take care of the section of Grand that it's focused on. And then Jefferson from Choteau south to where it meets Broadway. And in John's map, you'll notice that everything, Jefferson and Parnell north of Market, aren't just being resurfaced, they're being entirely reconstructed in upcoming years. So the full Jefferson corridor will be resurfaced. Also on this map are areas, and this was a question at the last CMC meeting. These blue outlines are areas where the Board of Public Service, in cooperation with alder people, have completed or in some cases nearly completed traffic studies of these sections of these corridors. The traffic studies are generally the precursor before making any significant lane modifications for traffic calming or road diets. So there's a completed traffic study for Goodfellow, the northern section of Goodfellow, basically from I-70 up to Halls Ferry Circle. There is an almost completed traffic study from West Pine or Lindell up to MLK on Kings Highway. There is a completed traffic study on the southern end of Kings Highway from the Christie intersection south to Gravois. There's a relatively short stretch of South Grand traffic study completed from Utah to Chippewa on the south end. So within Board Bill 184, there's sufficient funding for resurfacing projects. So that's a mill and overlay of the asphalt. There is not necessarily sufficient funding, except in the case of Riverview, which is also called out here, for the traffic calming elements, which might be, which are called for in those traffic studies. However, we'll be working with aldermen to try to identify ward capital to implement the traffic study recommendations in these corridors, but that'll require funding commitments from alder people, in some cases from multiple wards. So we're kind of working through those topics right now. We hope to be able to implement additional features rather than just resurfacing in these areas that are already studied, but it's a little bit to be determined. I will say, so we have until 2026 to expend these American Recovery Plan Act funds. So it's not as though all of this resurfacing will happen immediately. So there probably is a little time to work through improvements with alder people. And I think between the Board of Public Service and Streets Department, right now, it's being worked out kind of how to prioritize and implement the resurfacing projects, but I don't think that's finalized at this point. And that's my presentation. I think John and I are open to questions.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, John. It's very exciting to see that whole lay of projects and also to see on a map the questions that we raised last month. A couple of questions in the chat. One is the previous map that John shared, and I guess also this map that Scott is sharing, will those be available to the broader public or to advocacy groups like the CMC and TrailNet?
Yeah, we can certainly send these to you. So the only thing I'll say is this is not every major transportation project the city has. We have other projects that I just thought were probably of less interest to the CMC. However, yeah, we're happy to share this. Every project on this map is also in East West Gateway's Transportation Improvement Program, and it is also mapped there. So a version of this map is sort of already publicly available, just maybe with less city or CMC specific detail. And I think the other note on this map is that this isn't necessarily every single project the city will do, but this is projects that have funding commitments today, or preliminary funding commitments through East West Gateway. So, you know, there's other projects that are in planning, including very significant projects like the Hodemont Greenway from Great Rivers Greenway, other sections of the Brickline Greenway. There's a lot of planning going on around Market Street right now, west of Jefferson. And there's other segments that, you know, could be elevated in the future, and other roadways. So this isn't everything we're going to do until 2026, but it's the projects that essentially we know we're going to do. And on this map, there's about $122 million of projects that have some significant transit, bikeway, or significant road diet and traffic calming component. But I'll send these to you, Liz, and feel free to use them as you would like.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. And the caveats are helpful. So we have a couple of other questions. I'm going to ask Taylor's question, even though I think you've answered some of this already, Scott. What's the deadline for ARPA funding, which I think you said is 2026? Is there a date that the funds have to be spent? And if so, does construction have to be completed by that date?
It's the end of 2026. And so I don't know in detail how that will work when we get to the end of 2026. It may be that sometimes it's just funds that are encumbered that they know will be spent. Sometimes they actually want you to spend them. I think we'll probably have to dig into the ARPA guidelines in the future to determine that exactly.
Great, thank you. Next question from Patrick. So there's about $120 million listed on the map for physical infrastructure, and he's curious if there's any funding that's been allocated to education or enforcement along these routes, and if so, how much?
Well, these are maps of physical infrastructure, so that's what I was working on. I don't know that there's specifically funding allocation for education, or if that's specifically tied to corridors.
So I think indirectly the education will come in the form of public meetings, gathering input, educating the public on what we're doing and why, but no independent enforcement education programs.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Renee asks, are there any new bike lanes that eliminate an existing car lane? Maybe we'll start with that question and then come back to the next ones.
I can address that one, Scott. So I'll go over each project that does have a lane modification, and there are portions of the project. The first is Vandeventer as part of the Tower Grove Phase 1. We did do a significant traffic study effort to determine that we could eliminate 2 lanes of traffic on Vandeventer from Sarah Street to near Tower Grove, but it's a section of the business district. That's one. The Jefferson corridor in red up by Parnell, that is a 6 to 4 lane reduction along the whole length, so 2 lanes in each direction. Tucker downtown in the southbound direction, we are eliminating one of the southbound lanes to be able to incorporate that separated cycle track along the whole distance. I'm sure the GRG brick line, that will have a lane reduction. That a lot of that preliminary design will just be starting. At least on Grand it'll be, and Spring I'm not sure how that will end up, but that will all be on the table for usually what we analyze during consideration of a lane reduction. We'll look at traffic demand during peak periods, traffic volumes, and levels of service with existing conditions. And then we develop a model and run the same analysis and see if there's a lowering or degradation of the level of service during those peak periods. And we find that most of these arterials have excess capacity, which does enable us to do the lane reductions.
John, maybe that's a good tag on to the next question, which is if there are plans to modify motor speed along any of the bikeways. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how speed ties into that traffic study process.
A lot of the elements that are incorporated in all these major transportation projects will have some traffic calming measures that will affect traffic speeds, like bump outs at intersections, lane width reductions. We'll have it enhanced crosswalks and medians on some of the projects. So that will have an effect on reducing speeds. But at this time, we haven't talked about actually lowering the set speed limits. But the physical features will have that reduction effect.
Great, thank you, John. The next question is if there are any plan changes for parking minimums or local zoning on any of these strips where there's going to be improvements.
Well, so we are in development of a transit-oriented development of form-based zoning code district, the geography of which is Del Mar from the city limits to De Bolivar and De Bolivar south to Forest Park Parkway near the, I just realized I labeled this wrong. That should not say Del Mar De Bolivar Metrolink Station. It should say De Bolivar Metrolink Station. My apologies, Brian. But that form-based code district would have a reduction in parking minimums. So that one, through kind of a number of planning efforts in Skinker De Bolivar neighborhood, has identified reducing parking minimums as a priority for that community.
So on some of these other projects, we work closely with the treasurer's office, and modification of parking to accommodate, for instance, a two-way cycle track on 20th. And we oftentimes reallocate or reposition, relocate parking. And there is a difference in how the street looks when we incorporate proposed improvements and parking. But that it's always a negotiation that we work out with the treasurer's office.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. So our next question, so on the streets that are being resurfaced in ARPA funding, Kay would like to know if we are really doing only resurfacing on those streets, which is, I suppose, depends on the traffic study. Is there a possibility of adding primarily paint-based improvements like high visibility green bike lanes like those on Tower Grove or BRT lanes, particularly on the segments on Grand?
So I think some of that is to be determined. So what's in the ARPA bill is really funding that's probably just adequate for resurfacing the roadway. So that's a limitation. Within these traffic study areas, we're certainly going to be looking at additional enhanced improvements that will probably be funded with ward capital allocations. I will say things like bus lanes, those, I wouldn't describe those as low cost to implement. Those can be significant investments and require a lot of engineering in some cases. So I don't know that in particular bus lanes will be a feature, particularly because North Grand is going to be completely reconstructed in a couple of years for Brookline Greenway. But I do think there are opportunities, especially in the areas where we have traffic studies, to go beyond just the baseline resurfacing.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Aubrey specifically about the cycle tracks. Will the design, will these be in the design where the lane moves with the flow of traffic, like on the Chestnut segment downtown, or the lanes are grouped with the sidewalks, like on the Indianapolis Cultural Trail? Because the latter is great for tourists and recreation, but is really cumbersome for people who use cycling as a primary mode of transportation.
So there's a mixed design depending upon the project. Some of the projects like Tucker Cycle Track, it's a street level running two-way cycle track, 10 feet wide, where the cyclists are right next to each other, but they're protected by parked cars. If you go to the Brick Line in the Tower Grove Phase 1, along Tower Grove and Vanaventer, that's a sidewalk level running two-way cycle track where the cycle track is 6 inches above the vehicular riding surface, more of a higher level facility. And each project has its own parameters. If you're interested in knowing the details, I could certainly provide that to you, or the public houses for these will be publicized for you to get more information as well.
And we'll definitely share those open houses as they come up. Thanks, John. Okay, this is our last question for Scott and John, is about funding for future maintenance requirements, and if there's already funding set aside and how these projects will be maintained.
John and I are looking at each other.
I'm waiting for Jamie to chime in on maintenance. Any standard street infrastructure, public improvements that are constructed, is that any roadway facility, sidewalk facility? If it's standard, that typically would fall under the realm of the street department for maintenance. Now, if these projects are looking at green infrastructure or anything beyond normal trees, we'll be working with other parties to enter into maintenance agreements for atypical infrastructure, which most of what we're looking at is normal city infrastructure maintained by the street department?
I think in particular the Brickline Greenway projects, which are going to be really devoting a lot of that roadway space to greenway, meaning, you know, like a bikeway, but also a lot of landscaped area, kind of in some cases, something approaching like a linear parkway. Those are, I think Great Rivers Greenway is thinking hard about what their role and responsibility is going to be in maintaining those, because the designs of those will kind of go pretty far beyond what is typical city infrastructure that we maintain.
That's a great point. My comments were related to city managed projects, not the brick line. I do envision as the City Arch River project, they have a whole separate maintenance program on how to.
Good morning, good afternoon.
To continue to invest in that high level of maintenance. I think they might even have a separate subcommittee addressing how the brick line is going to be maintained.
Great, thank you both. And thanks everyone for all these questions, and to Scott and John for sharing all these updates with us. If there are additional follow-up questions, you can always email them and we will follow up with John and Scott and get some more information about that. I want to move us to our last segment of our meeting today. We're going to do some subcommittee updates. And I am going to start with the engagement committee, Dawn and Charles.
Hi, everyone. So quick update from engagement. We had another application for someone to become a voting member of the CMC. So yay, our mission and everything is getting out to people and people are applying. The committee did recommend that this individual be a non-voting member. So there actually is no follow-up necessary for the voting members of the CMC, but do know that we did recommend that individual to be non-voting. Next month, we are going to share an update on how the CMC is doing with our open seats initiative. So be on the lookout for that update. And also the engagement subcommittee is looking at creating a Facebook page for the CMC. So be on the lookout for that as well. Charles, did I miss anything?
No, you covered everything. Thank you.
Excellent. That's it from the engagement.
Great, thank you, Dawn and Charles. And I'm gonna actually screen share this so everyone can see when the engagement committee meets and who you get in touch with. And I also want to highlight that the engagement committee put together an onboarding guide for CMC members, both voting and non-voting members. So that's a great place to look for resources and information about the CMC. I put the link in the chat. I want to give a very quick traffic calming update. So I think, as everyone knows, Kevin Hahn-Petruso has moved on to a new role at WashU. So we're in a little bit of a transition with the traffic calming committee. So if you're interested in traffic calming, for the time being, contact me. But our hope is to work on wrapping up that guide in the next few months and getting it out there for folks to use because of all of the incredible work that the committee has already done. So more on that. If you are interested in attending, the next committee meeting is likely the 4th Tuesday in June from 10 to 11 a.m. And the link to that committee is available on the CMC's Google Calendar, which is linked in the onboarding guide. All right, Sam.
Awesome. Updates for open space subcommittee. We have been meeting with the treasurer's office, the city of St. Louis, to kind of bring back parking day for 2022. They are very supportive of parking day this year, which is on September 16th. If you're familiar with what we did back in 2019, basically we partnered, a bunch of other people partnered with the treasurer's office to like bag meters and basically make this application that's free and really accessible for a lot of people. So they're completely on board. We are looking to put that application out July 1. So give them a good amount of time for people to apply for those kinds of things. If you are doing, I'll just mention, if you're doing a parking day thing in a normal street, you'll go through the normal BPS permit, which we'll have in the application as well. So I'm really, really excited that the Treasurer's Office is on board with that. That is really good news. On the open streets types things, we're still just kind of developing a guide, developing some feelers for potential open streets types events. But I would say primarily of our goal right now is focusing on Parking Day and getting that program out and rolled out. So if you have any questions, my email's at the bottom. Again, we meet every second Wednesday from 10 to 10:30. So that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Sam. Okay, so that's our subcommittee updates. We have just 3 minutes left. Are there any announcements, things that anyone wants to share that we have not gotten out there yet?
Liz, just on the note, while I was listening to John and Scott do their notes, I was kind of developing just a really quick, I know to Becca's concern, it seemed like the map of safe biking routes was kind of a hot topic at the beginning of the conversation. But while they're doing that, I just kind of I know this is something that I told Becca I was going to do specifically around Wash U a while ago, but I just quickly made part of a mind map. If anyone's interested in what that looks like now, I'll pop that in the chat. You know, I'm not quite done yet, obviously. I've just really done about Central Corridor and kind of a little bit of the north side, but I will continue auto-populating it if someone's interested in it right away. I know the map that someone put in there, and I think as someone also mentioned in the chat, you know, sometimes bike lane streets are not, for example, like Olive downtown is not the most safe street to bike on. So I recommend you bike on Locust. Again, and as Scott mentioned, this is very subjective. You know, I'm using this as my experience and what we've done on TrailNet community rides, but completely subjective. And just trying to keep this kind of all ages, all abilities kind of riding system like this. So obviously our streets are not perfect and all these streets are not perfect. So I recommend people use their own discretion when looking at this map and when they look about biking places. And obviously we can take transit and bike to places as well. So but I'll throw that in the chat real fast.
Thanks, Sam. Extremely efficient. I really appreciate that. All right. Well, I think that's a great note for us to end on. Thank you everyone for your time and participation. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next meeting in June. And thank you again so much for being here.